Welcome to StrongHER Voices, the podcast for women navigating perimenopause, menopause, and midlife with strength, confidence, and community. I'm your host, Ashley Basilio. I'm a certified menopause health coach and fitness professional who believes this isn't a pause in your life, it's power. Each week, we'll talk honestly about the changes we go through and share trusted strategies for feeling your absolute best. Let's dive in. Hi, friends, and welcome to StrongHER Voices. I am so glad you're here. Today, we're answering the question that causes so much confusion. Why do I feel like my body is falling apart everywhere? If you're dealing with anxiety, joint pain, brain fog, and weight gain, you're not imagining it. Menopause is a whole body revolution, not just a reproductive change. We're going to dive into the key body systems that are impacted, look at the common symptoms, and most importantly, acknowledge that every woman's experience is unique. So I'm going to start by talking about the widespread symptoms and how they make us feel. And after that, I'll dive into the science. First, let's talk about the symptoms that you might be experiencing. Now, experts acknowledge more than 30, and I've actually even heard up to 50 some possible symptoms of menopause. And while this sounds unbelievable, it actually makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that losing estrogen means that every single organ in a woman's body is impacted. And think about that for a second. So we know that there are estrogen receptors on nearly every organ in the body. And so it's no wonder that women physically feel this transition in their skin, their ears, their shoulders, their belly, their brains, joints, and everywhere. Now, you personally may have experienced one, none, if you're lucky, or multiple symptoms and with varying levels of severity. And all that means is you're perfectly normal. And while it's true every woman enters menopause, there is no one universal experience of menopause. So think about it like childbirth. Every woman who's had a child has their own unique story of their pregnancy, labor, delivery, and postpartum experience. And menopause is kind of like that, except, of course, for the fact that not every woman can or chooses to have children, but every woman does go through menopause. So let's talk about what's really going on during menopause, because the symptoms can show up in so many different ways, but I'm going to group them together in a few major categories. First, there are the vasomotor symptoms, which is just a fancy way of saying that the classic hot flashes and night sweats, you know, those sudden overwhelming waves of heat that come out of nowhere and leave you fanning yourself or throwing off the covers in the middle of the night. They can be intense and they can be unpredictable and exhausting. I remember when I was younger, I still have visions of my mom going through a hot flash. And it just seemed to come on her immediately. She could not get her sweater or coat or whatever it was off fast enough. And I had no idea what that actually felt like until I started with my own hot flashes about a year ago. So at my worst, and right before I started taking hormone therapy, I was having on average of about 12 to 15 hot flashes per day. So that ended up being like one or more every waking hour. Plus I had night sweats, and it was actually really tough to get through some of my days. Depending on what you're doing, a sudden onset of a hot flash can be very inconvenient or embarrassing. But next, there's brain fog. And so this is the cognitive side of menopause. And like, think of it like maybe you've walked into a room and forgotten why, or you lose your train of thought mid-sentence. You might even wonder, what's happening to me? I've heard some women say they have seriously thought maybe they're going through early dementia. But the good news is, in most cases, you're not losing your mind. It's your hormones that are shifting, and it affects how your brain processes information. It's frustrating, but the good news is it's temporary and completely normal, because studies are showing that cognition improves after reaching menopause or shortly thereafter. Now, this is great news. I actually hope it's true because it's funny. I've been in my group class a few times lately. At the end of class, I usually give some announcements, and a lot of times I talk about what my next event is going to be in my community. And the last few times I couldn't even remember the title of the event. And these events are things that I work on every day in my career. So not being able to remember the title of it was a very strange experience. But luckily, most of the women in my class are also in midlife, so we usually just end up laughing it off together. Thirdly, mood changes. So they can be just as disruptive, and you might notice waves of anxiety or sadness that seem to come out of nowhere. Or maybe you're quicker to snap at someone than you used to be. And it's not that you suddenly become an angry or a moody person. Your hormones are directly tied to your emotional regulation. So when the ground beneath you is shifting, it's okay to admit that that feels hard. Now, for me, I notice that my darker emotions like anger and sadness seem to be felt so much more deeply than they were years ago. Like when I get sad, I get really, really, really sad. And sometimes it lasts for a whole day, and just about everything, no matter what happens that day, can make me cry. And I can actually find it hard to get things done. And my anger can be like that too. I can feel it really intensely. And then sometimes it's weird because when the next day rolls around, I swear it's really hard for me to even recognize who that person was, why she got so angry or so sad, and why I felt those emotions so deeply. Like, was that really me? I believe this is all related to hormonal fluctuations in menopause. So in addition to those changes, there are physical changes. And this is the long list. So if you've seen the list of 30, 40, 50 symptoms of menopause, most of them are the physical changes of menopause, like joint pain, stubborn weight gain around the belly, dry skin, thinning hair, low libido. And it can feel like your body is not yours anymore. So things are changing and shifting, even though your routines haven't. For me, I haven't changed anything I'm doing with my diet or exercise, yet somehow in the last 10 years, I've packed on more than 20 pounds little by little. And it feels so frustrating. And I talk to many women who feel the same. Like we're doing all the right things and not getting the results that we expect. So there's one more important thing that happens during menopause, and it's not physical. I don't even know if you'd call it a symptom, but I guess maybe it is, but I think of it as your identity. So you might find yourself feeling older, invisible, irrelevant, and you're kind of just wondering, like, where did my spark go and my sexiness and my confidence? And it's no wonder, because many of us at this stage are balancing multiple things. We're balancing our career, caring for aging parents. We have changes in our relationships. We're supporting kids or young adults, and we're just trying to keep everything together while our bodies are changing. I know something that's hit me in the last several years is I'll share something personal here, but when I look in the mirror sometimes from side two, I'm like, what the heck happened to my neck? It's got so much sagging skin on it that, where did that come from? I still feel young, right? But when I talked to my dermatologist about it, she told me it's a combination of loose skin and fat. And if I want to do anything about it, that'll be $3,000 for a treatment that may or may not work. Well, I say, forget it. Time to embrace aging is what I said. I can have a lot more fun with my $3,000 than that. But it is a fact, I have those same feelings too about trying to keep it all together and just wondering, what is my place in life? And I think that's a very common way for women in midlife to feel. So if any of this sounds familiar, I want you to hear this. I want you to know you're not alone, and you're not done either. You're still beautiful. You're still powerful. And most importantly, you are meant to be here. In fact, I started this podcast for exactly this reason, to remind you that this season of life is not a pause, it's a power shift. It's time for you to put yourself back on the list, to take care of yourself, and to step into the next chapter feeling informed, confident, and strong. Now, the next bit I'm going to talk about, now that we understand the general symptoms and how they show up in our life and make us feel, is the why and what's happening, the whole body impact of menopause. So let's look at why these symptoms are so widespread. Now, remember that estrogen and progesterone have receptors everywhere all over the body on nearly every organ, not just the ovaries. We kind of just talked about that. But when the levels of these two hormones decline, every major body system will feel the change. So I want to go through the body systems, one by one, and recognize the impact that perimenopause and menopause have on our body symptoms. First, let's talk about the big one, metabolism and body composition. And this is one of the most notable changes, and it's one of the most common conversations that I have with my clients. I want to start by saying that this is not your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. But what is happening is that your metabolism naturally slows down in midlife. And at the same time, the loss of estrogen changes how your fat cells behave. So the enzymes inside those fat cells start to promote fat storage. And it occurs especially around the belly and midsection. So even if your habits haven't changed, your body is simply operating under a different blueprint, you could call it. But we're also facing the double challenge of muscle mass decline. So muscle mass starts to decline while fat mass increases. Not exactly what we want to happen, kind of the opposite. But that shift in body composition, loss of muscle, increase of fat, makes it feel like your body's working against you. And in some ways, it kind of is. So to make things even trickier, bone loss starts to accelerate dramatically. Actually, up to 20% of bone density can be lost in just 5 to 7 years following your final period. So that is the onset of menopause. So I'm going to say that again. That's a staggering statistic. Up to 20% of bone density. 20% can be lost in just 5 to 7 years after menopause. And that's why the risk for osteoporosis increases so sharply after menopause. And the majority of people in this country and world actually who have osteoporosis are overwhelmingly women. Let's move on to cardiovascular system. So this one's really important because heart disease is the number one cause of death in women. It's more than all cancers combined. And estrogen is one of our body's biggest protectors. So as far as the cardiovascular system goes, estrogen acts as a natural vasodilator, which means it helps keep our blood vessels flexible and open so blood can flow freely. And when estrogen drops, our blood vessels can stiffen. And what happens then is our blood pressure can go up, our blood flow can go down, and our cholesterol can change. So if you're a woman in midlife and you've noticed your cholesterol has been at a certain level your whole life, and then you're around your perimenopause, menopause years, and all of a sudden your LDL or the bad cholesterol rises and the HDL, the good cholesterol, falls, that is a symptom of menopause because of the loss of estrogen. Now, some women will also notice heart palpitations, like fluttering, pounding heartbeats that feel really scary in the moment. You're not sure what's happening. Now, most of the time they're harmless and related to the hormonal changes, but always follow up with your doctor just to be safe if you're having any of the cardiovascular symptoms that may be related to menopause, just to make sure there's nothing else going on. So next up, I'm going to turn to the central and peripheral nervous system. So this encompasses your brain, your sleep, your mood, cognitive function. So hot flashes and night sweats are in this category, and they actually start in the brain, in the hypothalamus, and that's your brain's sort of thermostat. You may have heard it called your internal thermostat, and it gets all whacked out and confused when estrogen levels fall. It has a hard time regulating temperature. So suddenly it's reading your body temperature as too high. It kicks in cooling mode with a full-on sweat response. And that's exactly what's happening in those hot flashes and night sweats. Your brain is telling your body, oh, we need to cool immediately. And you start sweating, right? That's interesting. Now, our brain has tons of estrogen receptors. So that's the little joke here is when people say, oh, menopause is all in your head. Actually, a lot of it is in your head because your brain is full of estrogen before menopause. And estrogen is a very protective hormone, and it helps the neurons in your brain communicate efficiently. So when your levels of estrogen drop, some pathways get a little scrambled, things get confused. Sometimes you lose your words, forget what you're saying or doing or what you meant to do next. And that can be very frustrating. Like I said earlier in the show, it can lead women to think they're actually going through dementia early. You've got the brain fog, forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, and it's really just your brain a little bit scrambled. But the good news is it's rewiring itself for the new stage of life. And as I said earlier in the show, that studies show that cognitive function improves post-menopause. So that is one thing to be very happy about. Sleep, big one. So sleep can take a hit. Okay. Still talking here about the central and peripheral nervous system, because estrogen helps regulate magnesium, which is essential for deep relaxation and restorative rest. And so when estrogen drops, it's more common to have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, especially when you have the thermoregulation problems going on, like hot flashes and night sweats. For me personally, sleep continues to be my number one biggest issue in midlife. I have been suffering with excessive tiredness, the ability to get enough sleep, the ability to fall asleep, and the ability to stay asleep for more than 10 years. Okay, let's turn now to the reproductive and genitourinary system. And this is the one that we commonly think of when we think of menopause. But in addition to menopause signifying the end of our reproductive years, there are also physical tissue changes that happen with menopause. And so the big one here is the loss of ovarian function. And so that means no more periods, no more fertility. But in addition, the decline of estrogen causes changes in the vaginal tissue. The vaginal tissue will become drier, thinner, and less elastic without estrogen. And that causes a host of issues: irritation, discomfort, increased urinary tract infections, pain during sex, and those kind of sort of more private or emotional issues that are something so many women experience but rarely talk about. It's not just the vagina, though. The tissues around the urethra and bladder also depend on estrogen. So when those tissues lose support and elasticity, you might notice more urinary urgency, frequency, even incontinence, or recurring urinary tract infections, as I mentioned. Now, all of these changes together, they are known as the genitourinary genitourinary syndrome of menopause. It's abbreviated GSM. So if you've seen that before, that's what that stands for. And they're very, very common, more than most women realize. I want you to know that there's help out there. So there are even providers who specialize in this field. And vaginal estrogen is highly supported and safe, effective solution for most women to manage these symptoms. This is a conversation you should have with your doctor if you're experiencing them. Do not be embarrassed. All healthcare providers and doctors who deal with women in midlife have heard this before, and there is help out there. There's no need to suffer by yourself with GSM symptoms. Lastly, I want to get into the gastrointestinal system. Yeah, I didn't forget this one. So even your gut gets involved in the menopause story. Here I'm going to talk a little bit about progesterone and estrogen. So progesterone acts as a natural muscle relaxant. So you might have heard that progesterone is the calming hormone or the sleepy hormone. So when those levels drop, the smooth muscle in your digestive tract can slow down. And so with the loss of progesterone, you might notice more bloating or gas or even constipation. Now, estrogen plays a big role in the gut-brain axis. Have you heard this? And that gut-brain axis, that's the communication loop between your digestive system and your nervous system. I call it the gut-brain axis. And so when estrogen levels fall, that connection, it can get out of sync. And it affects not just your digestion, but also your mood and stress hormone. So everything's really connected. And that's why menopause can feel like such a full body experience. Now, lastly, I want to get into the very important point that context matters and menopause is a unique experience for women. We've covered what's happening inside your body, how it makes you feel, and why what's going on system by system. But I really want to pause here for an important point. And that is, I want you to know that every woman's menopause journey is unique. So some of what you might hear today, say, oh, that's me, my hands up, I can relate to that. And some of what you may have heard is not happening in your life or for you at all. And that's okay. No two women experience menopause the same way, whether it's the duration, the intensity of symptoms, even which symptoms you feel, it can all vary widely. And that's because there are so many factors that come into play. And some of these factors are your genetics, your lifestyle, your access to healthcare, even your race and ethnicity. These aren't small differences. They're actually a crucial part of the conversation. So here's some examples. For example, research shows that Black and African American women tend to reach menopause a little earlier, and they often experience more frequent and severe hot flashes, sometimes lasting a decade or longer. That's not brief, okay? That's years of disrupted sleep, mood swings, and discomfort that deserve real attention and care. On another hand, Asian American women, oftentimes, and these are generic reports, but oftentimes Asian American women report fewer of the classic vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats, but they experience other challenges instead, like more body aches, joint pain, shoulder stiffness, and fatigue. Interestingly, Latina and Hispanic women fall somewhere in between. So studies show that these women may experience hot flashes and night sweats at similar rates to Black women, but for a shorter duration. They also tend to report more sleep disturbances and joint pain, which can really affect daily energy and quality of life. Now, white women typically experience menopause a little later than average, but the average age in the US is about 51, 52, somewhere in there. And white women may have moderate vasomotor symptoms, but they're more likely to seek medical treatment or hormone therapy, which highlights the impact of access to care and awareness. And then there are Indigenous and Native American women whose experiences are deeply shaped by cultural context and community values. And I find this so interesting. I actually watched a report on TV about this recently. Some Indigenous and Native American women report fewer physical symptoms, but describe a more emotional or spiritual transition. In other words, one that's not viewed as a loss, but as a respected, natural phase of life. Isn't that cool? So, having said all this, when we talk about the menopause experience, we are not talking about one single story. We're talking about millions of women, each with her own biology, her own background, and her own lived experience. And that's the key point. Menopause is not just a biological event. It's deeply influenced by your life context and your culture and the kind of care and respect you receive along the way. So understanding all this helps us move toward an inclusive, compassionate, and personalized approach to women's midlife health. So here's what I want you to remember. If you're experiencing strange, frustrating, or unfamiliar symptoms right now, please know this. You are not imagining it, and you are definitely not alone. What you're feeling is your body responding to a profound hormonal shift, one that affects every system, every cell, and every part of how you move through the world. But here's the good news. Because menopause impacts so many areas, that also means there are so many ways to support yourself through it. From nutrition, movement, sleep, mindset, community, you have powerful tools to help you feel strong, balanced, and vibrant again. Menopause is not an ending. It may feel like it some days, but it's not. It's really just a recalibration. It's a new beginning for your body, your health, and your priorities. It's a new opportunity. The more you understand about what's happening inside you and how it's making you feel, the more empowered you become to make choices that work for you, not against you. So listen, take a breath, take care of yourself, and remember, this season of life is not about losing who you are. It's about rediscovering your strength, your voice, and your power. Thank you for listening to StrongHER Voices. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a quick review. It really helps other women find the show, and it means so much to me personally. And if you're ready to go deeper, come join our community at getfitwithashley.com/stronger, where you'll find connection, accountability, expert coaching, and the support you deserve. Don't forget to use code VOICES for $25 off your membership. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider for guidance that's right for you. Until next time, remember, this isn't a pause, it's power.